As part of your assignment brief, you have to develop ideas. And once you have an idea, you need to write it down into 3 detailed parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end. Over the course of a script, you would expect to see the story broken down into 3 parts. At their most basic, we are talking the beginning, the middle, and end. In most scripts, you will find that the second act will take up 50% of the actual storytelling, while the first act and the final act will be the rest. So Act 1, in terms of writing this out, in terms for your treatment, Act 1 should be 1 paragraph, Act 2 should be 2 paragraphs, and Act 3 should be 1 paragraph. In the first act, it typically starts with exposition. This is one or more scenes that establish the world of the story. They also need to establish the main character, and before this act is over, there should be some kind of inciting incident, one that pulls the protagonist out of their normal world and into the main action of the story. This first act concludes with some sort of turning point that launches the action into Act 2. Okay, so I'm going to use Star Wars as an example because it also uses a classic narrative arc known as the hero's journey. So applying Act 1 to Star Wars, we establish the world of the story with an opening text crawl which explains some of the backstory, and we launch into the first plot point where Darth Vader kidnaps Princess Leia. However, the film's true inciting incident comes later, when the newly introduced Luke Skywalker buys a runaway droid that leads him to the Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan tries to recruit Luke to embrace the life of the Jedi, but Luke ultimately rejects this call to action, which is a key plot point in the archetypal hero's journey. Act 2 consists of a rising action that leads to a midpoint, which devolves into a crisis and finally turns into a new plan of action, which leads on to Act 3. In Act 2, Luke discovers his aunt and uncle have been murdered by Darth Vader's stormtroopers. This marks a turning point for Luke. He realises the stakes are too high for him to deny his destiny. He embraces his destiny, a Jedi Knight, and leaves his comfort zone, which is the midpoint. The second half of the middle of the story, Darth Vader kills Obi-Wan, Luke's mentor, and this is a crisis. So Act 2 ends with Luke's dark night of the soul. He's at the lowest point of his life. Now the third act aims to resolve all the screenplay storylines in a satisfying manner and to tie up loose ends. Now the climax. This is where the third act begins with the hero pushing forward with an attempt to save the day. The bad guys are confronted and lessons are learnt. The climax should be emotionally satisfying. The denouement, as the story comes to a close, the events of the climax wind back down into normal life. While your story should have reached a resolution, it does not necessarily mean your screenplay has to have a neat, happy resolution. Instead, aim for a sense of closure. In the third act of Star Wars, Luke and his comrades take on Darth Vader in an action that's sometimes called storming the castle. In the film's climax, Luke and company engage in a final battle with Darth Vader. They destroy Vader's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, resulting in a triumphant victory. A very brief denouement follows, featuring a celebration, and the film reaches its end. So when mapping out your story, you want to incorporate these plot elements into your story. So Act 1, exposition, inciting action, turning point into Act 2, rising action, midpoint, turning point into Act 3, often called a crisis, a dark night of the soul. Then you've got your Act 3, your climax, denouement. And I'll show you an example of this for a lower budget short film type of things that you would make on this course. Okay, so let's apply this technique to my idea. So here's the logline. A teenager, home alone, hears a strange noise and they must investigate, hoping it's not something sinister. So my first act then, we have the exposition. A teenager and is at home watching TV. They hear a strange noise, which is inciting action, and they go and investigate. So this is the turning point into Act 2 of my short film. In the second act, the teenager searches the kitchen but finds nothing. They leave the kitchen, search the dining room, again they find nothing out of the ordinary, and they're about to give up, believing it was just nothing. So this is the rising action which leads to the midpoint. Suddenly they hear the noise again, but they realise it's coming from upstairs. They walk upstairs but then stop. They are too scared. This is their crisis, the dark night of the soul, and they decide to give up and walk back downstairs. and not investigate. So this is the turning point into Act 3. So the final act, the teenager can't let it go. They go back upstairs and investigate again, and they hear the noise again in the bedrooms. This is the pre-climax. They enter the bedroom and hear the noise under the bed. They look under the bed and find an old toy making the noise. The teenager removes the batteries and throws the toy in the bin. So that's the climax. And they leave the room relieved. End of the film. As I mentioned previously, you want to write this in 4 paragraphs. So if you look at my example, the first paragraph is Act 1, the next 2 paragraphs is Act 2, and then the final paragraph is the final act, Act 3. In the description below, you will find links to other videos showing you how to do other things in the video production process.